You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we have breaking news right now. Can you explain what just happened in the Eastern District of Virginia?
Brian, it looks like we potentially have vindictive prosecution number 2 on the books with, once again, Donald Trump's U.S. Attorney in Virginia, Lindsay Halligan, obtaining an indictment of Letitia James, the New York State Attorney General, reportedly for 1 count of bank fraud. Now, I immediately went to my big, ugly blue book of laws, the United States Federal Code, just to double check. And 1 count of bank fraud carries up to 30 years in prison. Now, let me hasten to add that in the federal courts, we have these things called the voluntary sentencing guidelines, which would bring in the potential sentence well below that. It could even be what we call a probation eligible offense, even in the unlikely event Letitia James were convicted. But based on all of the reporting and against the backdrop of what we know went on in the Letitia James investigation, which includes the lead attorney, an 18-plus year, who investigated Letitia James for this allegation of bank fraud, which reportedly involved Letitia James filling out some paperwork to obtain a mortgage to help her niece purchase a home in Virginia. The prosecutor who investigated that recently, there was reporting that prosecutor, her name is Elizabeth Usey, concluded not only that they didn't have a prosecutable case, but they didn't even have probable cause, which means they couldn't even obtain an indictment, never mind prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. So it sounded like in ordinary times that would be the death knell of any prospect of an indictment of Letitia James. And yet, just days later, what do we have? In the wake of James Comey being indicted and being arraigned in court and announcing that they would be fighting that indictment on vindictive prosecution and other grounds, it looks like Lindsay Halligan is up to her old tricks again, and now we have an indictment of Letitia James.
Now, I want to talk about the prospect of vindictive prosecution in just a moment, but I have to ask this obvious question because there are going to be critics of Letitia James who say, sure, you say that this is a vindictive prosecution, a selective prosecution, but at the same time, the indictment doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't happen by fiat. It had to be voted out by a grand jury. And so wouldn't that mean, because the grand jury voted this thing out, that it has to be legitimate?
No. And the reason I can say that is from experience. I presented cases to more grand juries than I could ever count over my 30 years as a federal prosecutor. And I have always said, Brian, and you've heard me say this, our viewers have heard me say this, an indictment is only as good as the ethics of the prosecutor who presents the evidence to the grand jury and asks them to vote. We have seen grand jury abuses in the past. The Breonna Taylor case comes to mind. But a prosecutor can go in there and literally indict a ham sandwich if the prosecutor is unethical. And maybe that is what Lindsay Halligan did. So, we will wait to see what any of the evidence looks like supporting this indictment. But first things first, just as we had James Comey's arraignment yesterday in federal court in Alexandria, Virginia, I was sitting in the very courtroom where James Comey was arraigned. We are now going to have an arraignment for Letitia James, and we will see what her announced defense will look like. She will probably, just as James Comey's lawyers did, announce the motions that she will be filing, seeking to have this indictment dismissed. Well, Brian, it looks like Donald Trump is comfortable weaponizing and misusing not only the Department of Justice, but trying to misuse the courts as well. I happen to think Donald Trump has a wake-up call coming because the judges will not permit vindictive prosecutions to be forced through their courts. So we are going to see some really robust and even scorched earth litigation coming up in both the Comey case and the Letitia James case.
What does the defense have going for it as its best defense right now in terms of proving that this is a vindictive prosecution? What smoking gun evidence, if any, do they have to be able to protect their clients? I mean, we're talking about Letitia James in this instance, but I guess we are seeing analogous situations with James Comey.
Donald Trump's reckless drumbeat of "I want my enemies prosecuted." Brian, you know what some of the most blockbuster evidence is? Some of the most powerful evidence of vindictive prosecution I think that the U.S. courts have ever seen. It is that post that looks like, we now know, was supposed to be a private message to his Attorney General, Pam Bondi, telling her what he wanted done to the likes of James Comey and Letitia James.
Yeah, and I'm going to put that post right up here on the screen. We now know, thanks to the Wall Street Journal, that this was supposed to be a DM, a private message to Pam Bondi. But this is what he wrote. He wrote, "Pam, I have reviewed over 30 statements and posts saying that essentially same old story as last time, all talk, no action, nothing's being done. What about Comey, Adam Shifty Schiff, Letitia? They're guilty as hell, but nothing is going to be done." Then we almost put a Democrat-supported U.S. attorney in Virginia with a really bad Republican past, a woke rhino who wasn't going to do his job. That's why two of the worst Democratic senators pushed him so hard. He lied to the media, said he quit, that we had no case. No, I fired him, and there's a great case, and many lawyers and legal pundits say so. Lindsay is a great lawyer, likes you a lot. We can't delay any longer. It's killing our reputation and credibility. They impeached me twice, indicted me 5 times over nothing. Justice must be served now.
Brian, have you ever heard Donald Trump utter publicly that his credibility or his reputation or that of his administration is being killed? He doesn't talk that way publicly, does he? Everything is always the best in history when it comes to Donald Trump and his administration. And here's the thing. You don't prosecute people because your reputation and your credibility is in the toilet. You prosecute people because the evidence and the law supports a prosecution, and for no other reason. That is such compelling evidence of vindictive prosecution that if I had to bet my $1, that's my betting limit, I have a feeling you're going to see not only some robust litigation of Letitia James' vindictive prosecution motion to dismiss, but you're probably going to see the judge dismiss this case prior to trial, which of course we know will inspire Donald Trump to do what? Attack the judge as a radical left-wing lunatic judge, because, Donald Trump always has some bullshit comeback.
And so in your estimation, what is the point of this exercise, recognizing that not only does he have so tenuous of a case already to begin with, but that every time he opens his mouth, he actually hurts his own case, the prospects of this thing actually succeeding. And so what is the point to continue to perpetuate what may ultimately be a futile effort?
Brian, with Donald Trump, I think fear and intimidation is always the point. Intimidate people into silence, intimidate people into, laying down, not speaking out, not standing up for their own rights, giving him what he wants. And I think he has shown this determination to destroy the perceived legitimacy of all institutions of government, which would seem counterintuitive for a president to want to do that. But you know what? If he can keep the people despondent, it's that much easier to control them and do what he wants. But I think I'm going to say this is a miscalculation. There's not a silver lining here. But if the courts hold strong, and I believe they will, and they begin to dismiss, sort of roundly dismiss and call out, criticize Donald Trump for the vindictive prosecutions that these are, what will that do? It will help show that Donald Trump is not the dictator he believes he is, because you can have your, compromised U.S. attorney, your insurance lawyer, Lindsay Halligan, beauty pageant contestant, go into every grand jury in the country and try to indict your enemies sans evidence. But if you don't win in court, if the jury doesn't convict, or if the judge dismisses, if the people aren't ultimately punished other than being punished financially because they're going to have to, pay lawyers, mount the defense, there are going to be sleepless nights, anxiety, produced for their families, and that is a form of punishment. And Donald Trump, I think, enjoys inflicting that kind of pain on others. But if you are exposed as someone whose threats at the end of the day to prosecute his enemies are hollow because you can't do it successfully, that will actually weaken the aspiring dictator rather than strengthen it. And not to mix apples and oranges here, Donald Trump couldn't even keep Jimmy Kimmel off the air for more than 1 week. That is not a very strong dictator.
Yeah, I think on that exact point, I'm trying to look for some hope in this, not just to convey to those who are watching, but for myself, right? Like we're in this too. We have to contend with the reality of this descent into fascism as well. And I think that that's exactly right, is that in moments like these, it looks like Trump has unchecked power. But when he sets himself up for failure, like he did with the Kimmel situation, like he's doing with the James Comey situation, like he's doing with the Letitia James situation, this may be the peak of his power, but because this is going to go nowhere, unless of course he draws like Aileen Cannon or somebody like that, but if and when this thing is thrown out with prejudice and he ultimately fails in his bid, it's going to show the extent to which this president is a paper tiger, that he can use the levers of government at his disposal to try and seek revenge against his political opponents. But if he's not successful at that, he's going to end up worse than he started in this situation. And that is exposing just how weak he is and how power hungry he is, but coming from a place not of strength, but of weakness, where he feels like he has to do this. So obviously this is a story that continues to develop. We will follow every twist and turn of this thing. For those who are watching, if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. I'm going to put the link to our channels right here on the screen. It's a great way to support our work, a great way to support independent media, and it doesn't cost anything at all to subscribe. So again, the links are right here on the screen. If you are not yet subscribed, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.